Real quick, before we get into fundamentals, I'm just going to take just a minute on Theology of Counseling 5, the doctrine of the church, casting a vision for a culture of discipleship. I've talked about it, but I just want to continue to embed this idea of what we're talking about in light of who we are as the local church. So this would be session 5 of your Theology of Counseling notes. Biblical counseling is neither an academic nor a theoretical exercise. It isn't a model meant to be isolated from the other avenues of grace and discipleship within the local church. Biblical counseling has to be fully integrated within the general discipleship experienced by sitting under the Word preached on a Sunday morning and the personal discipleship experienced in smaller group settings where people can live life on life together. Now, that's really strong language. So when I use that kind of strong language that this needs to be, it has to be fully integrated, I hope you hear my intent in that. I'm not saying that a parachurch counseling ministry is unbiblical or sinful or that people are wrong and sinful in going to that. I'm simply saying I think the most intentional expression of a biblical counseling ministry is as a conduit of discipleship within the local church. And I feel so strongly about that I'm seeking to impress that upon you. Often pastors feel overwhelmed by the issues their church members are going through. They feel ill-equipped for the counseling task and are all too willing to outsource the needs that people are experiencing. Depression, PTSD, bipolar disorder, gender dysphoria, etc. Being trained in the Scriptures alone, are we equipped for these issues of the mind? And I would say the heart. And as I look at that list, we also understand there's a level of physiology related to these issues, correct? Potentially. So are we equipped to be doctors that minister to a person's physiology? No. Should we play doctor? No. As pastors, should you play lawyer? No. Both because Paul says don't, that's not our role, but also because we're not attorneys. Now, I don't know how what do lawyers do? They litigate. I don't know how litigious Ethiopia is, but America is incredibly litigious. Everybody's suing everybody as often as they can. And so as churches, we're having to be very careful about how we initiate the counseling process, the documents that we have a person sign, that they won't take something from the counseling process and seek to sue us because of that. I don't know if how that translates, but if it does, that's something that you guys can talk through with Michael. And all I know is in an American context, we will not start a counseling process with a counselee unless we know them well as members, without them signing these documents that says, okay, if something goes down, we're going to use a third party to arbitrate. We're not going to go to court. Things like that. We're going to draw those ground rules very carefully just because of the context we're seeking to care for people in, right? Our heart is sincere in its intent to serve and minister to people, and people can turn that on a dime and try to sue you for money in America. And so we're having to be careful about that, right? To date, just so you know, to date I haven't had somebody say, I'm not signing that, I'm going to go elsewhere. People are fine with signing it, right? And they get it. And even though we've had to explain it. But you'll have to understand your context and whether or not those things are as important here as they are there. So anyways, the notes are there. When it comes to why does this matter? Because without a vision, all of the biblical counseling needed by people in your church will be done by you, which will wear you out. Okay, so sorry, I think I skipped enough for that to feel disconnected. It's important that pastors, equipped with the Scriptures, the leading of the Holy Spirit, and the faith that God can work powerfully in those who are His, to affect real change in a person that feels hopeless. Because when it comes to why does this matter, because without a vision, all of the biblical counseling needed by people in your church will be done by you, which will wear you out and possibly position you for burnout. Doesn't make sense unless I've built into this outline a paragraph on the need for raising up counselors within your congregation. Okay, so forgive me for missing that. I don't know how I did that, but maybe I'm getting to it and it feels disconnected. Embedding biblical counseling in the local church will help your church fulfill the command to have every person actively utilizing their gifts to build up the body of Christ. So that's where, this is where Ephesians 4 comes in. And we want to see people who have a skill set, have a gift set, where they could be utilized as counselors in the local church, actively involved in a biblical counseling ministry. So that's what the guys at Sovereign Grace Church of Louisville, that's what we're working on right now. That would be a unique ministry initiative within Sovereign Grace, as I understand it. Sovereign Grace historically has been that pastoral teams or the pastors would be the ones taking on the counseling load. But what I see and what we see in Ephesians 4 is that there are gifts being given to the local church whereby people can be trained and effective in taking on some of the counseling load. Not every counselor is going to be able to take on the same kind of situations and scenarios. But as you, in your pastoral role, identify people, train them, and equip them, and then entrust counseling scenarios to them, you're multiplying your efforts within the local church. Okay? That takes some of the burden off of you, that's not the primary goal, right? It's not just to make pastoring easy for pastors. That's not what we're doing. We do want to see every gift God gives to the local church utilized in the way that He has prescribed, and then we'll see the church built up according to Ephesians 4. So we're building a vision of adding intensive discipleship to our churches. We're considering this layered discipleship. We're adding biblical counseling to general discipleship of what happens on Sunday mornings in our Sunday gatherings. We're adding biblical counseling to what happens through personal discipleship in our community group setting or small group setting. So if you think of what happens on Sunday mornings as general discipleship, right? There's an aspect of obedience to what happens on Sunday mornings, right? The author of Hebrews was clear. Do not forsake the assembling together of yourselves, right? So we practice being obedient to that command by what we do together on Sunday mornings. And then we want to see people engaged in community groups or small groups, whatever you call them, when they come about. Those are encouraged for faithful living. And then when people are stuck in their sanctification in one way or another, they need help through suffering or because of areas of sin, we're going to add this personal intensive discipleship model of biblical counseling to help them work through those issues. So I'm going to let you read on what equipping should look like, what training should look like, how you confirm counselors, and then leave it at that so that we can spend a few minutes getting into the fundamentals of biblical counseling and that outline. So go ahead and flip over to Fundamentals of Biblical Counseling track notes. This would be Fundamentals of BC 1 and 2. So, what I'm about to share with you is an outline built off of the notes that I had from what's called the Fundamentals track of what the association. Let's see, it was NANC, National Association of Nuthetic Counselors, and then they changed their name to ACBC, Association of, I think it's Certified Biblical Counselors. And they offer a fundamentals track to everyone wanting to be certified through their organization. And so this is where they start. This is where every counselor starts in their training. And I wanted to give this to you because one thing that ACBC does really well is they're very practical. Very practical. And so you'll see under the heading of Fundamentals of BC 1 and 2, Build Involvement and Give Hope. Are we all on the same page? So building involvement, I touched on this in earlier when we were in our circle back there. Building involvement is one of the core fundamental things you need to do every time you meet with a new counselee. The goal in building involvement is to establish trust with the counselees, not only so they're willingly sharing their concerns with you, but also so that they'd be open to your counsel. Have you ever had somebody try to give you counsel that you weren't ready to trust them, and they hadn't built enough relational capital with you for you to be open to their counsel? You know, hey, I got some advice for you. Okay, but who are you? I don't know you that well, right? What we want to do is we want to make sure that as we come into a counseling session with a counselee, as we start asking them questions and as we start doing some of the things that I'm going to suggest, they recognize how much you actually care for them. Okay? That's the goal. And so in doing so, in building involvement, the counselor is able to minister to the counselee's needs more effectively. So how do we do it? One, we demonstrate compassion. Demonstrating compassion will go a long way in building involvement. So we're going to seek to put ourselves in the counselee's shoes. Does that phrase translate? You know what it means to put yourself in someone's shoes? We're going to try to experience or feel the level of vulnerability with them as they share. We're going to allow that to establish empathy in our hearts for the counselees. So if we sense something that they're grieving about, we're going to attempt to grieve with them, right? If they're celebrating something, there's an appropriate place to celebrate with them. But we are going to demonstrate compassion in these ways. We're going to kind of ask yourself the question, how would I be responding to this person if they were a close family member? Well, that's how I want to be responding to them. And most of the time I want you to know, it's easy to do that because these are people that are in your congregation. You've been walking with these people, so it's not a stretch to be able to do this. And if you're pastoring them, if you're shepherding them, if you're preaching to them, there's a level of connection already that it's not going to be challenging for them to build involvement with you because they already feel that based on all the other ways you're ministering to them. Okay? So secondly, we're going to demonstrate respect. We're going to demonstrate respect for them. We're going to use verbal communication that builds up, that strengthens. We're going to use helpful nonverbal communication. That can include a properly seated position. I'm not going to sit so relaxed that you don't feel like I care for you. All right? I'm going to give you proper eye contact, vocal inflections. If AB says, "Yeah, this really hurt me," and I go, "Ah, really? Oh, you're serious?" You know, that's not going to help, right? If Faisal says, "You know, I'm really struggling with this," and I roll my eyes like you're joking, that's not helpful, right? If I come in and maybe the first week, you know, I've sat up to the desk if we're over a desk and I'm sitting there and I'm taking notes, and then week 2 I'm a little bit more relaxed, and by week 3 I'm hanging out away from the desk with my legs crossed and I'm kind of arms folded and I'm just kind of looking out the window as one of you shares. That's not helpful, okay? That's going to say, hey, I'm disengaging from you. What you have to tell me isn't that important. That's not going to demonstrate the respect that we need in the counseling process. So, we want everything that we're doing to show that we're taking the counseling process seriously and we're taking what they're saying seriously. So you can encourage them with showing confidence in them at appropriate levels and at appropriate moments. You can welcome their input. You can maintain a dialogue format. You need to guard against dueling monologues. This is a big one, guys. I don't know what your personality's like, but in the counseling process, It's not about you getting in what you need to say and them getting in what they need to say, and you guys are competing for that space, right? It is a conversation that you guys are having as a way to care for the counselee. You're wanting to guard yourself against, okay, I've listened to you long enough, now you need to listen to me. You would think it would be natural, we wouldn't have to say that, but when you get into a certain situation, sometimes you may get the sense like, this person can't stop talking. I don't think they're even capable of stopping talking, you know? And in some cases, you may have to address that. But for the most part, you can develop a conversational style in the way that you're interacting with them so that it isn't this dueling monologue effect. And then another way that you demonstrate respect for them is you maintain biblical confidentiality, right? The last thing you want a counselee to do is find out from somebody else in the church something that they've shared with you in the counseling context. They will resist you. They will probably have a very difficult time re-engaging in the counseling process if that happens. Yeah, James. Well, I would be very general. One, because in all likelihood, whatever I would share with her is going to overly burden her, and I don't want to do that, right? So I'm going to protect her by being very general. Oh, I heard some things today in the counseling that just kind of weighed me down. It was just kind of tough, kind of a tough day. And I know that's enough for you to know how to pray for me. So thank you. You know, and just that way it leaves the burden light. It doesn't, because you know, our wives are, well, for those of you who are married, you know that your wife can try, you know, she's picking up signals. Is he feeling distant from me because of something I've done? And so you don't want to leave them suspecting and wondering about that. So you can help them at times by just giving them a little bit. But giving them too much, I remember the pastor back at Grace, he would tell stories of, you know, he'd go home and he'd share everything with his wife. And then he'd go to bed and she'd be up for hours. just in turmoil over this stuff that he had shared. He was not serving her by sharing stuff. So then he stopped doing that so she could sleep. Yeah, Itzikor. Okay, so what about when you're on a team, an elder team, and should you be keeping things confidential from them? I think this is still something that we work through on a case-by-case basis in Louisville. I think there are certain things that all the elders that need to, like, so we have an elder team of 8 elders. Okay, we've got more elders than the Lord has been very gracious to us. We have a lot of elders. So 8 guys, 5 of which are on a counseling and discipleship team that oversees the aspects of counseling and discipleship ministry within the church. And we'll get together apart from the other 3 and work through counseling related issues, community group related issues, and if there's an intense counseling issue that we need help with, we'll utilize that team to get counsel. When we do that, oftentimes we'll stay as general as possible so that we can keep the confidentiality while at the same time recognize I'm not the fount of all wisdom. I need help. And so when I explain confidentiality to a counselee, I'll say, listen, I'm going to keep our conversations confidential, but with the caveat that there may be times when I need the help of one of your pastors who loves you dearly. I may need to get their input on how to best care for you. Is that okay with you? If they say no, then I'll talk through that with them and try to help gain buy-in from them on that concept. If they don't want their pastors to know what's going on, I find that problematic. Pastors, CJ, Jeff, Brian, any of the guys, at Sovereign Grace Church of Louisville are just as responsible for the souls as every other pastor on the team. And so if it's going to serve this person in our congregation for me to get counsel from them, we're not just sitting around talking bad about the counselees, right? Can you believe that, Joker? I mean, this person actually calls himself a Christian. We're not talking about our people like that, right? We're trying to find the wisdom necessary to know how best to lead them and care for them and direct this counseling process so that they can grow and change. As I explain that to a counselee, there's only been one scenario when I've been asked, please keep this confidential. And so in that moment, like, don't tell anybody. It's that sensitive in nature. And I said, okay, before I agree to that, let me go back to the other pastors and make sure they're okay with that. Because I don't like to have secrets that other elders aren't aware of, right? For me, as elders, we're seeking to care for this congregation collectively. If I know something about this person and this elder doesn't, it's going to impact the kind of interactions he may have with that person on a Sunday morning. He may give counsel, or he may say something that could almost be inappropriate based on what I know about the situation. So, but in that moment, I went back to Brian. I said, here's what's being asked of me. What do you think? He's like, yeah, I think that's okay in this situation. Good. Well, you don't accept that conversation. So for instance, now, I would say most of the time, I'm not going to accept that conversation. If a person says, you know, I've got some questions about CJ. Or I've got a problem with Bob. Okay, well, let's stop right there, and let's invite Bob into the conversation. Well, no, I don't want to talk with Bob. I just wanted to tell you about my concerns with Bob. Well, the scriptures are pretty clear. We don't do that, and you certainly don't want to bring a charge against an elder. So I'm trying to protect you by encouraging us to have a conversation with Bob. Are you okay with that? Oh, I'd rather not. Then we probably don't need to talk about this. And how about if we pray about it and we'll touch base on it at another time? So I'm going to try to protect them. I'm going to try to protect me, and I'm going to try to protect Bob in this instance, right? But let's say a person comes and says, I don't know what to do with this, but I was out at a restaurant the other night and I saw Bob, and when I went to greet him, he swung at me, tried to hit me, and I don't know what to do with that. Now, if you know Bob, that's ridiculous, but I'm trying to say there's a situation where they feel trapped. They don't know where to go with this information, and now what do? Well, I don't want to leave them in that position of feeling trapped. I'll say, wow, that's I'm so sorry that, at first I'll be like, no, you got the wrong guy. But I also want to take seriously what they're saying, right? It's that appropriate response. Be like, okay, wow, that's pretty serious. I think it would be good if we went to him. Well, I just know he said the next time he sees me, he's going to kill me. Okay, well, let me go first, and let me just ask him about this. And if we need to bring a couple of other pastors in on this, we'll definitely do that. We want you safe. We want you protected. But if there's something in Bob's life, he's a sinner, just like the rest of us. We'll work through it together. How's that sound? I would feel better if there were pastors between me and Bob. Yes, that would be fine. Does that help? So there might be a scenario where I might hear something before suggesting we actually stop and interact with the person. But it would be because the person is either allowed to speak and then constructive action is taken. That's the only scenario that I would suggest I'll hear something first before bringing the other party in. If there's no constructive action that's going to be taken after this conversation, let's not have the conversation if you're not willing to have it with the person. There's got to be redemptive action that's taken.
What if that? Yeah, I think that's sort of.
Otherwise, it's gossip or slander, and we can't do that. And I'm not protecting the person by allowing them to share it. Now, we could nuance that out. Maybe there's other scenarios that we could say, but what about, and we might play with the response and say, yeah, okay, in that case, we could do that. But I'm trying to give like a general concept. Yeah, and that's a good point. Part of the document that we have for confidentiality lets them know that, like, if this has legal ramifications, we can't withhold information from the law, from the police, for instance. Like, if there's an abuse allegation, especially if it's child abuse, we have to go and report right away. So the person, even if we were wrong to accept confidentiality, we would have to break that promise, and I would have to ask that person to forgive me, and they would say, I would never have told you if I had known that. I will plead request your forgiveness all day long, but I cannot not go. I have to go and report that. So there are situations within the document where we're saying there are certain things we can't keep confidential. So if in some event, I was planning to attack my wife, or whatever, there may be a need for me to get the police involved or something like that. I think making sure people are aware. Listen, what we're going to talk about is between you and me, unless I think it's going to benefit you that another pastor helps me direct this counseling process. That's the only reason that I would bring somebody else in, is for your benefit, for your good. You okay with that? If they're not, yeah, I'm having a lengthier conversation, and I'm giving myself a little room to make sure I'm not the only elder that knows about this. Yeah, if you're, and this is a process of learning how to take people's burdens and quickly cast them on the Lord, right? We've got 1 Peter 5. We understand that concept. But all too often, I think counselors can take this burden and then it stays right here. And it gets heavier and heavier and heavier until we feel overly burdened and we never want to counsel again. We want to be careful of that. We need to understand we're conduits of this information. It doesn't stay with us. It doesn't reservoir with us. We're taking them to Christ. We're taking everything we hear to Christ. We have an outlet. It just may not be another person, one of our friends. We're going to go to Christ with this. And as you feel overly burdened, allow that to express sympathy for the person that you're ministering to. Like, allow the Lord to use that to help you engage more deeply with them and care for them. And at the same time, recognize, okay, but at the same time, Lord, please allow, I need to cast this on you because I can't bear it all. I can't bear it all. What I have found is there have been moments, Deb will agree with this, like where I would come home just everything's drained out. I don't have anything left. I am exhausted over what's just happened. But in God's kindness, I don't stay there. And the more focused I am on the gospel and the hope that I see, even when I see sin, and that I've not been called to fix anything. Oftentimes the overly burdened feeling I get is I'm trying to fix this. I see how it could be fixed, and these people are not responding to that, and I feel overly responsible for that. Does that make sense? If I'll limit my responsibility to what I'm actually called to do, which is simply proclaim. It's like a pastor or like a preacher. If you're preaching, how responsible are you to convert the people that you're preaching to? How responsible are you to produce change in the people you're preaching to? Hopefully a big goose egg, right? You got no responsibility. That's the Spirit's responsibility. That's the work He does. in the lives. If you're a parent and you have unconverted children, which we all start out with, right? And you feel overly burdened in converting your children, it'll wear you out. It'll kill you. And so in the counseling process, you have to know what your role is. My role is to hear well, reflect, and then, okay, here's the grace set before us. Let's walk in it together. What do you say? I'm with you. Are you in? Good. Let's go. And if they're not, okay. Well, I wish I could appeal to you to engage. But if you ever decide to do so, you know where I'm at. Otherwise, my responsibility is not to change this person or affect change in this person.